I've actually gotten quite a bit of pushback from that initially, mostly from parents, because they look at me and they're like, listen, I'm not looking for you to train my kid like a bodybuilder. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I said we'd follow an atypical periodization model. And the reason for that is swimming doesn't have an off season, right? Like I said, short course season, August through March, and then they tend to get, a week off, and then they go long course season, kind of April through August. And, there's spring break in there and there's a couple breaks, but really they get 4 weeks off a year. That doesn't exactly lend itself to the typical preseason, in-season, off-season, kind of block. So we do more of, it's more of like a spectrum, right, that we're training and that we're periodizing through. And we're starting off, hey, let's just build that absolute strength. It is, in my opinion, one of the most important qualities because it can translate to basically anything you want it to, right? If you are unable to produce much force in the first place, you can't be powerful, right? If your force production is here, and that means, well, that's as much force as you can produce regardless of how fast you can produce it. If you bring your force production up here, now you can train the rate of force development so you can produce more and more power and tap into that force production even faster.
So if we're going to be using endurance as an analogy, is that kind of like saying that's your base? Is that our base strength, something like that?
Yeah, that's how we look at it for sure, because let's tap on endurance, right? So if your max force production is here, then you can probably produce this much force for a long period of time without getting super fatigued. You bring the force production up, so does the endurance, right? So that goes with it. Now you can absolutely train muscular endurance directly, but that's the thing about the absolute strength, right? Is you can translate that to power, you can translate that to speed, you can translate that to endurance, you can translate that to pretty much anything else, but it doesn't necessarily go the other way, right?
Yeah,
so that's why we spend a good chunk of time training absolute strength. And I've actually gotten quite a bit of pushback from that initially, mostly from parents, because they look at me and they're like, listen, I'm not looking for you to train my kid like a bodybuilder. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold up. That's not at all what we're doing, I promise. And I'm like, I don't train them like I train. However, when they see the movements that we're doing at the loads that we're doing, people are like, well, what's the point? The water isn't that thick. You don't have to push against something that heavy, that slowly. It's like, no, of course you don't. But it allows you to produce more force faster down the road, assuming that you hit the other qualities along the way. So after we kind of work our way out of that absolute strength, then we start moving more towards, now there's another one, there's strength speed, right? Which is moving lighter things faster, but still, a good amount of load to it. That's an area we don't spend a ton of time on, but past that, it's going to be speed strength. And that's where your power production is going to come in. That's going to be moving a lighter weight or a lighter load pretty fast, right? And if you're stronger, it's a lot easier to train speed strength because now you're able to produce more force. So the lighter loads will actually be faster as is. You spend time in that range. So we're talking like 60 to 70% of one rep max, for example. That's going to be a lot more transferable to the sport than the absolute strength is. However, if you don't have the absolute strength there to begin with, it's like that ceiling is so much lower, right? So you train in that 60 to 70% zone. Now they're getting good power output. They're able to use that in the water. We'll go even past that and we'll start training like explosive strength or speed even, which is very light loads very, very quickly. Now, plyometrics, I kind of see as its own kind of side category, right? That's training the stretch shortening cycle. That's training the stretch reflex, right? So that they can come into the wall for a flip turn and that calf and that ankle complex is loaded and then quickly deloaded. That's free energy because when you stretch that muscle, there's elastic energy that gets stored there and you can, boom, explode off without having to actually exert. You don't have to produce that force, right? It's kind of like a passive boost to your race. The only way the tendon is going to get strong enough to hold that kind of load, guess what? Back to the absolute strength, right? So it all ties back together. We do keep jump training, plyometrics, medicine ball, explosive work kind of throughout the year, because it's not like they just have one meet, right? They're competing several times throughout any given season. Short course season, they tend to end with like a focus meet. That's what we periodize towards. So absolute strength, then we get into kind of the speed, strength, and power, and then we kind of get into like a peaking protocol, which is going to be high intensity, speed-based stuff that's low load, as just moving it as fast as they can. That's where you're going to see Olympic lift variations. That's where you're going to see more emphasis on medicine ball slams, that kind of thing, with plyometrics throughout, depth jumps, so many different variations of box jumps. We're just trying to maximize output, minimize fatigue, so that they go into that last meet and they can just absolutely crush it.